My entire life was built on a promise I never actually made. I lived, breathed, and worked for a truth that only existed in my own mind. For over 4 decades, I believed in a family, a legacy, and a friendship that turned out to be the most elaborate fiction, and I was the only one who didn't know the plot. The day the curtain was finally pulled back wasn't in a dramatic confrontation, but in a sterile lab room, with a doctor speaking in a low, careful voice that somehow managed to shatter every single thing I thought was real. Have you ever had that creeping feeling? Not a sudden shock, but a slow, cold drip of doubt that starts in the back of your mind and just won't stop. You ignore it. You push it down. You tell yourself you're imagining things. Because the alternative is too terrifying to even consider. For most of my adult life, I was an expert at ignoring that drip. My name is Arthur Bell. By trade, I was a structural engineer. My job was to calculate loads, to understand forces, to design foundations that could withstand pressure, time, and the unpredictable elements of nature. I believed in observable facts, in mathematical certainty. The blueprint didn't lie. The numbers didn't lie. I built my career and my entire sense of self on that principle. The cruelest joke life played on me was teaching me that while steel and concrete obey the laws of physics, the human heart follows no such rules. I want to take you back, not just to the moment it all fell apart, but to where it began, to the very foundation. You have to understand what I believed in, what I valued, to understand the depth of the collapse. I grew up in a slower time, in a town where the heat rose in visible waves from the pavement in summer, and the smell of gardenias hung heavy in the evening air. My father was a quiet, principled man who worked with stone. He taught me that a man's character was like a cornerstone. It had to be square, solid, and true, because everything else is built upon it. My mother was the warmth to his strength. Her kitchen was the heart of our home, always filled with the scent of baking bread and simmering stews. From them I learned a simple, unwavering creed. You work hard, you keep your promises, you protect your family, and you stand by your friends. Loyalty wasn't just a word. It was the mortar that held everything together. And the first friend to whom I applied that mortar was a boy named Silas Morrow. Our friendship felt less like a choice and more like a fact of nature. We were simply part of each other's landscape. I met him when I was 7 years old. He had moved into the green shingled house at the end of our street. We discovered each other one afternoon, both staring with equal fascination at a large turtle making its slow, determined journey across the dusty road. We didn't say much at first. We just knelt down and watched. That silent, shared observation became the template for our entire relationship. We were partners in curiosity, in adventure, in mischief. Silas was the bold one. I was the careful one. He'd dare us to climb the tallest oak. I'd figure out the safest way to do it. He'd get us into scrapes. I'd find the logical way out. We were a perfect, balanced system. Our families became intertwined. Holidays, picnics, Sunday dinners, Silas was there. He wasn't a guest. He was family. My parents treated him like a second son. His mother would ruffle my hair and call me her other serious boy. The trust between us was absolute and unspoken. It was the kind of bond you assume is forged for life, immune to the rust and wear you see elsewhere in the world. As we grew, our paths began to hint at different directions. I found solace in structure, in the clean lines of geometry and the logic of problem solving. I'd spend hours drawing, calculating, building model bridges out of balsa wood. Silas was a creature of charm and impulse. He could talk to anyone, sell anything, but had little patience for long-term plans. He lived in the vibrant present. While I buried myself in textbooks to earn a scholarship for engineering school, Silas was working at the local hardware store, winning over customers with his easy grin and quick wit. The day I left for university was bittersweet. My parents were bursting with a pride so profound it was almost painful to witness. My father's handshake lasted a few seconds longer than usual, his eyes shiny. My mother couldn't stop hugging me, and there was Silas, leaning against his old car, giving me a mock salute. "Don't get too smart for us out there, Professor," he joked, but then he pulled me into a quick, hard hug. "Proud of you, Art." In that moment, the different paths didn't matter. The bond was still the cornerstone. College was a whirlwind of new concepts and intense focus. I'd come home on breaks, and Silas and I would fall back into our old rhythm as if no time had passed. He'd have wild stories from his sales jobs. I'd try to explain the principles of statics. We didn't fully understand each other's worlds, but we didn't need to. The foundation of our shared childhood held firm. After graduation, I landed a job with a respected firm. It was the dream: meaningful work, a good salary, a clear future. But it came with a cost. Travel. Significant travel. My projects were spread across the state, sometimes the region. I'd be deployed to a site for 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks at a stretch, living in temporary housing, my life packed into a single suitcase. Then I'd get a week, maybe 10 days, at home before the next assignment called. It was a brutal rhythm, but I embraced it. This was how I would build the future I'd been promised. This was the hard work that would fund the family, the home, the security. I was laying the economic girders for a life I could only imagine. It was during one of these brief, weary respites at home that Silas asked to meet me. He suggested a place we'd gone to since we were old enough to order a soda, a worn-down diner on the edge of town with sticky vinyl booths and the best cherry pie for 100 miles. The moment I saw him, I could tell he was buzzing with something. It was in the way he drummed his fingers on the table, the extra brightness in his eyes. We made small talk, ordered our pie and coffee. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice dropping into a more serious register. "Art," he began, a strange half-smile on his face. "I've got someone I want you to meet." I raised an eyebrow. "A client? For the firm?" He laughed, a bit too quickly. No. Nothing like that. A woman. Her name is Clara." I was taken aback. Silas had dated plenty, but he'd never played matchmaker for me before. She's special," he continued, his gaze drifting to the window. "She's a friend of my cousin. I met her at a gathering last month. We got to talking, and I just kept thinking, she's exactly the kind of person you need in your life. She's smart, she's kind, she's got this laugh that makes you want to laugh too." He looked back at me, his expression earnest. "I told her all about you. The engineer with a heart of gold. She's intrigued." Looking back now, I dissect that moment like a forensic scientist at a crime scene. The nervous energy, the specific phrasing, the kind of person you need. The fact that he had already told her about me in such detail. At the time, I felt nothing but a swelling gratitude. My life on the road was lonely. My social circle had shrunk to colleagues and foremen. The idea that my best friend, who knew me better than anyone, had found someone he thought was perfect for me, it felt like a gift. It felt like fate taking a merciful turn. The thought that it might be anything else, a setup, a diversion, a calculated move, never once flickered in my trusting mind. A week later, he orchestrated a casual run-in at a friend's backyard barbecue. Clara was there, standing near the lemonade pitcher. She wore a simple white dress and had a stillness about her that stood out amid the chatter. When Silas led me over and made the introduction, she turned and smiled. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sudden, quiet certainty. Her handshake was firm, her eyes a clear, intelligent gray. We talked easily about books, about the old town, about nothing and everything. Silas, after making the introduction, seemed to fade into the background, a pleased observer. What I know now, of course, is that I wasn't being introduced to a stranger. I was being carefully inserted into a pre-existing dynamic. Silas and Clara had a history, a connection that had been smoldering for some time. But he was, in his own chaotic way, a realist. He saw my clear career path, my stability, my potential to provide the kind of life he couldn't promise. And Clara, I would later learn, wanted security. She wanted a future that felt solid, not speculative. In that sun-dappled backyard, I was not just a man she was meeting. I was a solution, a safe harbor. And Silas, my brother, was the one steering her ship toward my dock. Clara and I began to see each other. Our courtship was a whirlwind, built in the narrow gaps between my work trips. Long, earnest phone calls late at night from my motel room. Intense, precious weekends where we tried to pack in a month's worth of connection. She was everything Silas had said, and more. She was perceptive, asking deep questions about my work, my dreams. She spoke of wanting a home filled with light and children, of wanting a partnership built on mutual respect. I was utterly, completely charmed. I saw in her the missing piece of the blueprint I'd been drafting in my head since I was a boy. And Silas was always there. The third point in our triangle: if I took Clara to the movies, Silas would just happen to be there and join us for ice cream after. Family dinners at my parents'? Of course Silas was invited. He was family. My mother adored him, and she adored Clara, and seeing them all together at her table filled me with a profound sense of rightness. One evening, after a particularly raucous dinner, Silas put an arm around my shoulders, a beer in his other hand. "When you two finally make it official," he said, his voice thick with affection, "I'm your best man. That's non-negotiable." We all laughed. It felt like a foregone conclusion. But there was an incident, a tiny crack in the perfect veneer. I had planned a surprise picnic for Clara one Saturday. I arrived at her apartment early, a basket of food in hand, and instead of knocking, I peered through the slightly open screen door into her living room. They were there, Clara and Silas. They weren't embracing or anything so dramatic. They were standing close, very close, in the middle of the room. Silas was speaking in a low, intense murmur I couldn't make out. Clara was listening, her head bowed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her body language wasn't romantic. It was pained, conspiratorial. It was the intimacy of shared stress. I must have made a noise, or my shadow fell across the floor, because they both jumped apart as if electrocuted. Clara's hand flew to her throat. Silas spun around, and for a split second, I saw sheer panic on his face before it was wiped clean and replaced with a broad, forced smile. "Art, you're early," he boomed, walking toward the door. I was just dropping off that tool set I borrowed last month. Got talking and lost track of time. Clara hurried over, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I was just offering him some iced tea for the road. "Come in, honey. It's so hot out." I stood there on the porch, the picnic basket feeling suddenly foolish in my hand. The moment hung, thick and awkward. Every instinct in my body, the engineer's instinct that noticed when a measurement was off by a fraction, screamed that something was wrong with this picture. The angle was off. The load wasn't distributed correctly. And then I did what I would do for decades to come. I rationalized. I dismissed. My code forbade suspicion of my best friend and my beloved. To doubt them was to doubt my own judgment, my own foundation. So I smiled, stepped inside, and accepted the glass of tea Clara pressed into my hand. I chose the lie because it was easier than dismantling my entire reality to examine the supports. We were married 8 months later in the same small church where my parents had been married. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony. My father, his voice thick with emotion, told me I was building a fine life. My mother wept openly, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. And Silas stood beside me at the altar, as promised, in a slightly too tight suit, grinning like he'd won the lottery. When I turned to see Clara walking down the aisle on her father's arm, a vision in simple silk, my chest felt too small for my heart. This was it, the culmination, the finished structure. I was a husband. Soon I would be a father. Everything was according to plan. I didn't know I was marrying a woman who was, in her heart, already a wife. I didn't know the best man was, in every way that mattered to her, the groom. Married life began with a cruel mirror of my work rhythm, immediate separation. A major project on the other side of the state was in crisis, and my expertise was needed. I had to leave just 3 days after we returned from our brief honeymoon. I felt like a failure already. I held Clara's hands in ours, apologies tumbling out. "Arthur, stop," she said softly, her gray eyes steady. "This is your work. This is what you do. This is our future. I'll be perfectly fine. I have plenty to do here." It was then that Silas, who had come over to help me load my truck, chimed in. "Don't you worry about a thing, partner. I'll hold down the fort. Check in on Clara, make sure the pipes don't freeze or anything." He gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You go build your bridges. We've got things here." The gratitude that washed over me was immense. What a blessing. What an incredible friend. To have someone I trusted so completely to be my eyes and hands at home while I was away, it felt like a divine safety net. The irony of that thought is now a permanent, cold knot in my stomach. That first month away was long. I called every night. Clara's voice was always calm, cheerful even. She was painting the bedroom. She'd joined a book club. "Silas fixed that wobbly step on the porch today," she'd say. Or, "Silas helped me hang the curtains in the living room." Each mention was a relief. All was well. My world was in good hands. When I finally returned, the house was immaculate. There was a welcome home sign taped to the door. Clara had made my favorite meal. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes that melted in your mouth. The sense of homecoming was profound. That evening, Silas came over with a six-pack. We sat on the porch as twilight fell, and he filled me in on everything I'd missed, the minor town scandals, the funny things that had happened. We laughed, clinked bottles, and the three of us sat there, a perfect little triangle under the stars. I felt like the luckiest man alive. I had vaulted straight from my parents' simple, honest home into my own perfect version of it. The structure was complete and sound. A few months later, Clara told me she was pregnant. The joy I felt was a physical force, a geyser erupting after years of quiet digging. This was the next phase. This was the meaning of it all. I stared at the little plus sign on the test stick, my hands trembling, and I knew my life had just irrevocably changed for the better. I promised myself, and her, that I would be a better father, more present, more involved. But the projects didn't care about my promises. The travel was non-negotiable. As Clara's pregnancy progressed, my absences continued, and each time I expressed worry, Silas was there, a ready-made solution. "I'll take her to her obstetrician appointment on Tuesday," he'd offer. "I already scheduled the handyman to look at the water heater. Don't fret about it." I thanked him profusely, each time. I saw it as the ultimate act of brotherhood. He was protecting my family when I couldn't. The concept that he might be protecting his own interests, his own growing child, was so monstrous it never even formed as a ghost of a thought in my mind. I was the planner, the architect of this future. He was just the helpful foreman. I, meanwhile, read the parenting books. I assembled the crib, my tongue between my teeth in concentration. I painted the nursery a soft, calming green. I talked to Clara's growing belly, telling the little person inside about stress tolerances and the beauty of a well-designed arch. I was all in. The day our son William was born was the brightest day of my life up to that point, the sheer, staggering miracle of it. When the nurse placed that tiny, red, squirming bundle into my arms, I was overcome. I looked into his scrunched-up face and made vows that were deeper than any wedding promise. I would move mountains for this child. I would be his foundation. I would be everything my father was to me. Silas was, of course, one of the first visitors. He arrived with a massive bouquet and a ridiculously oversized teddy bear. He hugged Clara gently, praised her, and then turned to me, his eyes shining. "Let me see him, Papa." I carefully transferred William into his waiting arms. Silas looked down, and his entire face transformed. It wasn't just a smile. It was a look of awe, of profound, bone-deep recognition and pride. It was the look of a man seeing his own continuation in the world. It was a father's look, and I saw it. I saw it as clearly as I see my own hands typing this now. A cold spear of clarity shot through the warm haze of my joy. That look was wrong. It was too much. It belonged in a mirror behind me, not on the face of my friend. In that frozen second, a door in my mind cracked open, and a terrifying draft of doubt whistled through. What did I do? I shut the door. I slammed it closed and bolted it tight. I chuckled, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Careful, Uncle Silas, he's already got a grip on that finger of yours. Future engineer, maybe." We all laughed. Clara's laugh a bit high, Silas's a bit too loud. The moment passed. The door remained shut. I chose, actively and deliberately, to believe in the beautiful lie instead of the horrifying truth. It was the first of 1,000 such choices, a habit of denial that would become the true architecture of my life for the next 40 years. I went back to work. The rhythm resumed. Departure, absence, return. The long drives, the lonely motels, the relentless focus on providing. And with each return, my family grew, and so did Silas's role within it. He wasn't a visitor. He was a fixture, a beloved, familiar piece of the furniture. The children adored him. He was the fun one, the one who showed up with surprises, who had time for games, who knew all the latest jokes. I was the sometimes remote authority figure who arrived home tired, asked about grades, and dispensed allowances. But I was Dad. That title, that name, was my anchor. It had to be enough. I made sure it was enough, through sheer force of will. But the mind, that brilliant, treacherous engineer, never stops calculating. It notices inconsistencies. It registers when the load is off, even if the heart refuses to acknowledge it. It started subtly, years later, as the children grew from toddlers into little people with distinct features. William, my firstborn, had a peculiar way of tilting his head when he was confused. One evening, Silas was over for dinner, telling a long, convoluted story. He reached the puzzling part of the tale, and he tilted his head, in that exact, peculiar way. A perfect mirror. My breath caught in my chest. I stared at my son, then at my friend. A coincidence, surely. A trick of the light. Then our second son, Thomas, developed a broad, square jaw as he entered his teens. My jawline is narrow. Silas's is broad and square. Clara's father had a narrow jaw. I'd stare at Thomas across the dinner table, this handsome young stranger wearing my son's clothes, and the cold drip of doubt would start again. Our daughter Lily was artistic, deeply emotional, with a dramatic flair neither Clara nor I possessed. Silas's mother, I recalled, had been a community theater enthusiast. She gets it from my side, Clara would say vaguely when I mentioned it. But which side? The side she never talked about? The whispers weren't just in my head. The outside world began to murmur. My own father, a man who chose his words like rare gems, sat with me on the porch one autumn evening. The kids were playing tag in the falling leaves. He sipped his whiskey, watching them silently for a long time. "They're good kids, Arthur," he said finally, his voice gravelly. "Fine kids. But it's funny, they don't carry much of you in their faces, do they? Must be strong genes from Clara's line." He said it not as an accusation, but as a simple, observational fact. It was a fact that landed in the pit of my stomach like a lead weight. If he, with his dispassionate eye, could see it, who else did? What quiet conversations happened at the town pharmacy? What knowing looks were exchanged at school events? The idea that I might be a public object of pity, a cuckold building a life for another man's family, was a humiliation so profound I couldn't face it. So I didn't. I buried the comment along with all the other evidence. I doubled down on my role. I was the provider. The rock. If I couldn't control the biology, I would master the environment. I worked harder. I pursued promotions, took on riskier projects for bigger bonuses. I bought a bigger house in a better neighborhood. I paid for the best schools, the music lessons, the summer camps. I built a beautiful gilded cage for my family, and I was so busy forging the bars, I never stopped to wonder why I felt like the one trapped inside. Silas was always there, enjoying the world I was paying for. He was at every school play, every soccer game I missed due to a site emergency. He knew their teachers' names, their friends' dramas, their secret fears. He had the daily, trivial intimacy that is the actual substance of parenthood. I had the responsibility, the bills, the worry, and the increasingly fleeting moments of connection during my brief respites home. The children loved him. They truly did. And why wouldn't they? He was a constant, fun, devoted presence, To them, he was Uncle Silas, a second father in all but name. The cruelest part was that I was grateful for it. I saw his involvement as a gift, a supplementation of my own absences. I would thank him, sincerely. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Silas." He'd just clap me on the back, a strange, unreadable look in his eyes. Anything for family, art, anything. The foundation of my life, the one I had engineered with such care, was not made of bedrock. It was made of wishful thinking, loyalty exploited, and a fear of the truth so powerful it allowed a beautiful, terrible lie to stand for over 40 years. And the earthquake that would finally bring it all down was still years away, waiting in the wings, in the form of a simple medical test. Life, once it finds a rhythm, has a way of convincing you that this is simply how things are. The constant oscillation between the grinding solitude of work and the intense, compressed chaos of home became my normal. I was a man living two lives, and the bridge between them was a growing pile of pay stubs and a deepening well of fatigue. The children kept coming. After William, we had Thomas, then our precious Lily. Finally, our Benjamin, the baby who would complete our family portrait. With each new birth, the same ritual played out. My overwhelming, tearful joy. The promises whispered to a newborn's head. The frantic preparation before my next departure, and Silas, ever present, stepping into the space my leaving created. He was the one who painted the second nursery. He assembled the second crib. He was the face my pregnant wife saw at checkups when her feet were swollen and her back ached, and I was 500 miles away looking at soil samples. I remember a specific evening. Benjamin was just a few months old, colicky and fussy. I was home for a rare 10-day stretch, and the house was a symphony of noise. William and Thomas arguing over a toy, Lily practicing her recorder with more enthusiasm than skill, and Benjamin's piercing cries cutting through it all. Clara moved through the kitchen with a tense, pinched expression, trying to start dinner. The air was thick with overwhelm. I was on the floor, trying to pacify Benjamin, feeling utterly useless. My engineering mind could solve complex load-bearing equations, but it couldn't decode the mysterious language of an infant's distress. In that moment of shared frustration, the phone rang. It was Silas. Clara answered, her voice tight. "Oh, Silas. Hi. It's one of those nights." She listened for a moment, and then her shoulders, which had been hunched up near her ears, visibly dropped. A small, relieved smile touched her lips. That would be a lifesaver. Really? Yes. See you soon. 20 minutes later, Silas walked through the front door without knocking, a bag of takeout in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. It was as if he'd thrown a switch. He took the screaming Benjamin from my arms with a confident, practiced motion, tucking him against his shoulder and murmuring something low into his ear. Almost instantly, the crying subsided into hiccuping whimpers. He handed Clara the wine, gave William and Thomas a look that somehow silenced their squabble, and declared, "Pizza's here. Lily, you're in charge of plates." Within 15 minutes, the chaos had been transformed into a messy, happy pizza picnic on the living room floor. Benjamin was asleep on a blanket. Clara was finally eating, color returning to her face. The kids were laughing at one of Silas's silly stories. I sat there, a slice of pizza cooling in my hand, and watched the scene. I felt like a spectator in my own home. A grateful spectator, mind you. Look at my wonderful friend, I thought, saving the day yet again. What would we do without him? The gratitude was genuine, and it completely smothered the other, uglier feeling that stirred beneath it, a sense of irrelevance, of being the financial engine that powered a machine someone else knew how to operate. Have you ever felt like a guest in your own life? Like you're funding the production, but you don't know your lines, and everyone else is following a script you haven't seen? That feeling, that quiet displacement, became a permanent resident in my chest. I countered it the only way I knew how, by working harder. If I couldn't be the daily hero, I would be the legendary provider. I took on projects in harsher climates, for longer durations. I saved every bonus, invested cautiously, and upgraded our lives in tangible ways. The house grew. A swimming pool appeared in the backyard. The cars got newer. The children went to a prestigious private academy. I was building a monument to my success, and my family were the beloved inhabitants of its halls. I told myself, this was love. This was fatherhood. This was my sacrifice for them. But the monument had cracks, tiny hairline fractures I was an expert at plastering over. The most obvious crack was the simple, undeniable fact of resemblance, or the lack thereof. As the children grew, the ghost of Silas seemed to emerge more clearly in each of their faces, their mannerisms, the very cadence of their speech. William, my firstborn, had Silas's exact way of throwing his head back when he laughed, a full-bodied, abandonful roar. I have a quieter, closed-mouth chuckle. One Thanksgiving, Silas told a joke at the dinner table, and both he and William erupted in that identical head-back laugh simultaneously. It was like an echo. Everyone else laughed at the joke. I felt cold. Thomas developed a lanky, loose-limbed athleticism. He was a natural on the basketball court, all grace and instinct. I was coordinated but stiff, a planner even in movement. Silas, in his youth, had been the star of our high school team. I'd been in the math club. Watching Thomas drive to the hoop was like watching a ghost from Silas's yearbook photos come to life. Lily had Silas's mercurial emotional landscape, quick to fiery passion, quick to profound sadness, with an artist's sensitivity. My emotions were a deep, still lake. Hers and his were a stormy sea. She would have dramatic fallings out with friends, and it was Silas she would seek for comfort, not me. He'd take her for drives, and she'd return red-eyed but calmer. When I asked what they talked about, she'd just shrug and say, "He gets it." And Benjamin, the baby, was a carbon copy of Silas's childhood photos. The same cowlick, the same mischievous glint in his eye, the same way of biting his lip when concentrating. Putting a picture of 5-year-old Silas next to 5-year-old Ben would have baffled any stranger. I began a pathetic, secret ritual. I would pull out my own childhood photos and line them up next to school pictures of my sons. I'd search for a curve of an ear, a spacing of the eyes, anything. I'd stare in the bathroom mirror, then stare at their sleeping faces. Nothing. No bridge. It was as if my genetic code had been entirely erased from the equation. Clara had an answer for every hesitant inquiry. William has my uncle's laugh. Thomas is built like my grandfather. Lily is just a sensitive soul. It's not from anyone. All babies look like someone in the family. You're imagining it. Her explanations were smooth, delivered with a patient smile that slowly began to feel condescending. It was the smile you give a child who is afraid of a monster under the bed. There. It's not real. The outside world was less gentle. At a school parent-teacher conference for Thomas, his well-meaning teacher said, "He's such a charismatic boy, just like his uncle. Mr. Morrow is such a fixture here, we all just assume he's family." She laughed. I forced a smile, my face heating with a shame I couldn't name. At a neighborhood barbecue, a man I barely knew, after a few beers, clapped me on the back and said, "You're a good man, Belle. Letting your buddy be so close to your kids. A lot of guys would be threatened. But you see him with your daughter, he's like a second dad to them." He meant it as a compliment. It felt like a diagnosis. And then there was Helen, Silas's wife, a quiet, slender woman with watchful eyes that missed nothing. Our families socialized out of obligation. At birthday parties and holiday gatherings, Helen was a silent statue in the corner. She rarely spoke to me, but sometimes I'd catch her looking at me. Not with malice, but with a profound, aching pity that was infinitely worse. Her eyes would follow Silas as he played with my children, and her expression was that of someone witnessing a recurring, painful dream. Once, at Benjamin's 6th birthday party, I saw her standing alone by the fence, just watching Silas lift a squealing Ben onto his shoulders. A single tear traced a path down her cheek before she quickly brushed it away. When our eyes met, she looked not embarrassed, but resigned, as if we were both prisoners in the same silent jail. I started to become hyper-aware of the logistics of the lie. Silas had a key to our house. I had given it to him myself, years ago, for emergencies. Now I'd come home from a shorter trip and find subtle signs of his presence. A coffee mug in the sink that wasn't ours. The smell of his particular brand of cigarette smoke lingering on the back porch, even though no one in my family smoked. A shift in the driver's seat of Clara's car. Tiny data points that my mind, against my will, began to compile into a damning report. The most damning evidence, however, was behavioral. When I was home for extended periods, Silas's visits became less frequent. He'd call with excuses, work, a headache, helping his mother. But the moment I left for another project, he was back, his presence filling the void I left behind. It was a perverse, inverse relationship. My absence was the condition for his full participation in my family. I was funding a play where I was never supposed to be on stage for the important scenes. The children, innocently, cemented the reality. William, as a teenager, got into a fierce argument with me over his curfew. After our shouting match, he didn't retreat to his room to sulk. He got in his car and drove away. An hour later, Clara got a text at Uncle Silas's. "Calming down. Be back later." He had gone to him for solace. Thomas, struggling with algebra, wouldn't wait for me to return from my trip to help him. "It's okay, Dad," he'd say. "Uncle Silas is going to come over and show me his way. He's good at it." Lily wrote a heartfelt poem for a school assignment about the man who understands me. It wasn't about me. It was a tribute to Silas's empathetic ear. I was the law, the bank, and the distant authority. Silas was the confidant, the ally, the fun parent. The roles were so clearly defined, and I had designed the entire system myself through my absence. The psychological toll was insidious. I became quieter, more withdrawn. The cheerful fatigue of the hard-working provider curdled into a sullen, watchful resentment. I was angry all the time, but I had no legitimate target. I couldn't be angry at my children for loving a man who was always there. I couldn't be angry at Silas for being the friend I had asked him to be. I couldn't be angry at Clara for what? For relying on the help that was offered? The rules of my own moral code trapped me. To voice my suspicions would be to accuse the two people I was supposed to trust most of a monstrous, long-term betrayal. The accusation was so catastrophic that the act of forming it felt like a kind of insanity. So I turned the anger inward. I was failing. I was a bad husband for being gone. I was a bad father for not being more relatable. My feelings of suspicion were a personal failing, a sign of a petty, jealous mind. I'd look at my handsome, healthy, successful children and feel ashamed of myself for the dark thoughts that clouded my love for them. This internal war raged for years. I'd have periods of calm acceptance, where I'd lose myself in the joy of a family dinner or a child's accomplishment. Then I'd see a gesture, hear a phrase, or walk into a room that still held the faint scent of Silas's cigarettes, and the cold doubt would flood back in, more powerful each time. The breaking point, the moment the thin shell of my denial finally began to splinter, came with my retirement. After 40 years of deadlines, travel, and responsibility, I handed in my badge and my hard hat. There was a party, a gold watch, speeches about the bridges I'd built. I drove home for the last time as a working man, filled with a profound sense of anticipation. Finally, I would get what I had worked for all those years. Time. Unstructured, abundant time with my wife, my now adult children, my grandchildren. I would reclaim my place in the daily tapestry of my family. But a strange thing happened when I stopped leaving. The entire ecosystem of my home life, which had evolved to function perfectly in my absence, began to malfunction with my constant presence. Silas virtually disappeared. The daily calls stopped. The drop-by visits ceased. When I'd call him, his voice was strained, his excuses flimsy. Busy with a new venture, art, helping Helen with some things. The man who had been a daily fixture for 4 decades suddenly had no room in his schedule. Clara became strangely nervous. She'd jump when the phone rang. She started taking long, solitary walks. She'd find reasons to run errands alone. The comfortable, taken-for-granted rhythm of the house was gone, replaced by a tense, silent waiting. I was an invader in my own home, a surplus component. The machine was designed to run on my money and Silas's presence. Now I was here, providing neither function adequately, and the gears were grinding. I started digging, not consciously at first. It began with nostalgia. I was cleaning out the attic, organizing a lifetime of memories stuffed into cardboard boxes. I found an old photo album from before we were married, pictures of Clara in her early 20s, and there, in several photos, was a necklace, a simple silver chain with a teardrop pendant. I'd never seen it. She didn't own it. I took the album downstairs. Clara was gardening. I pointed to the necklace. That's pretty. I don't remember this. Her trowel froze in the dirt. She didn't look up. Oh, that old thing. It was a gift. From a friend. I lost it years ago. Which friend? She finally looked at me, her eyes wide, her face pale. Just a friend from college, no one you know. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, and walked inside, leaving me alone in the yard with the open album. Her reaction was not one of nostalgia, but of pure, unadulterated panic. The drip was now a steady stream. I began to notice other things. A charge on our shared credit card for a nice restaurant in a town an hour away. The date was a Tuesday, a day I had been at a conference. When I asked Clara about it, she stammered, I must have left the card in my car. Maybe someone stole it and used it. I'll call the bank. The fraud report was never filed. I found a receipt in her coat pocket for 2 tickets to a concert that had happened while I was away. She'd told me she'd gone with a girlfriend from her book club. The receipt was from an online purchase made from our home computer. I checked the browser history for that date. It had been cleared. The evidence was no longer in glances and resemblances. It was in the digital and paper trails of a double life. My engineering mind, trained in forensic analysis of structural failure, was now turned on the blueprint of my marriage. And every calculation led to the same catastrophic conclusion. The final catalyst, the event that made seeking the truth unavoidable, was medical. Our youngest Benjamin, now a vibrant young man in his 20s, began to get sick. Terribly sick. It started with exhaustion, then swelling, then alarming test results. The diagnosis was swift and brutal: kidney failure. He would need a transplant to survive. The family mobilized. We were all tested, Clara, myself, William, Thomas, Lily, to see if we could be donors. It was a desperate, hopeful scramble. In the terrible anxiety for my son's life, my personal suspicions were shoved aside. Nothing else mattered but saving Ben. We all went to the lab together, a united front. We gave our blood, making grim jokes about who had the healthiest kidneys. Silas was notably absent from this family effort. When I called to tell him the news, his reaction was strange. Not shocked concern, but a muted, almost guilty sadness. He said he'd pray, but he didn't offer to get tested, didn't rush over. He receded even further into the background, a ghost finally fading in the daylight of a real crisis. The weeks waiting for the results were agony, but it was a dual agony. One was the piercing fear for my son's life. The other was a darker, dreading fear of what those results might reveal about me. Compatibility for organ donation is often strongest within immediate biological families. This test wasn't just about saving Ben. It was about proving, once and for all, what I was to him. Every time the phone rang, my heart would stop. Clara became a ghost in the house, moving silently from room to room, her face a mask of dread that seemed to go beyond a mother's worry. She was waiting for a verdict, too. Then, one overcast Thursday afternoon, the call came. It was the transplant coordinator. Her voice was professional, carefully neutral. "Mr. Bell, we have the initial tissue typing results back. We need you and your wife to come to the clinic. The doctor would like to discuss them with you in person." A cold hand closed around my throat. They don't ask you to come in person for good news. They don't ask you to come in person to say you're a perfect match. I looked at Clara, who was hovering in the doorway. She had heard my end of the conversation. All the color had drained from her face. She looked like she was staring into an abyss. "They want us to come in," I said, my voice flat. She just nodded, her hand gripping the doorframe so tightly her knuckles were white. In that silent, charged moment, a complete understanding passed between us. No words were needed. The pretense was over. The decades-long performance was coming to its final act. We were not going to the clinic to talk about kidney compatibility. We were going to get the autopsy report on our marriage, on our family, on my entire life. The drive to the clinic was the longest 12 miles of my life. Silence filled the car like a solid, suffocating substance. Clara stared out the passenger window, her profile a still life of dread. I focused on the road, my hands at 10 and 2, my mind a whirlpool of terrible looping thoughts. I wasn't thinking of engineering solutions or logical outcomes. I was simply bracing for impact. We were shown into a small, quiet office, not an examination room. That was the second clue. A grim-faced doctor in a white coat gestured to 2 chairs. A folder lay closed on the desk between us. "Mr. and Mrs. Bell," he began, his voice low and impossibly heavy. "Thank you for coming in. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." He opened the folder glanced at the top page, and then looked directly at me. We've completed the initial compatibility screening for Benjamin's potential donors. These tests are very thorough, and as part of the protocol, they include genetic analysis to confirm familial relationships. It's a standard verification. My heart wasn't beating. It was hammering a frantic, irregular tattoo against my ribs. I could feel Clara trembling beside me. The doctor took a slow breath. "Mr. Bell, the results indicate that you are not a compatible donor for Benjamin. More than that, the genetic analysis conclusively shows that you are not Benjamin's biological father." There it was, the words, clinical and final, hanging in the sterile air. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with the soft click of a ballpoint pen the doctor was holding. I heard a small, wounded sound escape Clara's lips. My own body felt numb, detached. The doctor's gaze was filled with a professional, painful pity. He continued, knowing the worst was yet to come. "Given this finding, and with your family's consent for testing on file, we cross-referenced the other results. I have to inform you that the same is true for William, Thomas, and Lily. You are not the biological father of any of your 4 children. Any of them." The phrase echoed in the hollowed-out chamber of my mind. I had braced for 1, maybe 2, but all 4? It was an annihilation so complete, it felt almost absurd. 45 years of fatherhood. The midnight feedings, the scraped knees, the college tuition, the walks down the aisle, all built on a biological falsehood. I was a tenant in a house where my name wasn't on the deed. And is there more? I heard myself ask, my voice sounding distant and calm, which was the greatest shock of all. The doctor nodded, his expression growing even graver. "Yes, the analysis shows a consistent genetic link. All 4 children share the same biological father. The same man fathered them all." The final piece of the horrible puzzle snapped into place. It wasn't a series of affairs, of random mistakes. It was a systematic, lifelong deception. One man. The same man. While I was pouring concrete under a blazing sun, he was in my home, fathering my children, one after another after another. I didn't need to ask the next question. I knew. With a certainty that felt older than time, I knew. But the engineer in me, the part that demanded documented proof, spoke up. "Can you tell who it is?" "No," the doctor said. "The test identifies a genetic profile, not a name. But if you have a suspected individual and can provide a sample for comparison, a hair, a used toothbrush, anything with Dina, we can perform a confirmatory test." I stood up, my legs held. "Thank you, doctor, we'll be in touch." Clara remained seated, weeping silently into her hands. I didn't touch her. I didn't look at her. I simply walked out of the office, down the hall, and out into the blinding afternoon sun. She followed, a few paces behind, a ghost of the woman I thought I'd married. The next 48 hours were a blur of icy, focused purpose. The grief, the rage, the universe-shattering betrayal, they were there. A tsunami held back by the thinnest of mental levees. But first, I needed proof. Not for me, for the court of my own mind, and for the confrontation to come. I called Silas. My voice was eerily steady. "Silas, it's Art. Look, with Ben being sick and all, it's got me thinking about my own mortality. My doctor says men our age need a full workup. How about we go together? Get the blood panels, the whole 9 yards. For old time's sake." There was a long pause on the other end, a hesitation so profound I could feel his fear through the phone line. But his lifelong role, the helpful friend, kicked in. He agreed. I took him to a different lab the next day, one affiliated with the hospital. I made small talk about cholesterol and prostate exams. When he finished, I told him I'd pick up both our results. "Save you the trip," I said with a smile that felt like a crack in my face. He nodded, looking relieved to be leaving. As soon as he was gone, I went to the administration desk. I explained the situation in a low, urgent voice, presenting the earlier test results. I asked them to compare the new sample from John Doe with the paternity profiles. I paid a fee for expedited processing. The woman behind the desk looked at me with such deep compassion, it was almost worse than scorn. The confirmation came 2 days later via a secure email. Greater than 99.9% probability of paternity. Subject is the biological father of all 4 referenced individuals. Attached was a chart, a series of numbers and markers that were the scientific epitaph of my life. Now, the levee could break. What do you do when the person you need to confront is also the person who has been the mirror to your own soul for 60 years? Where do you even begin? I called him to my house. I told Clara to be gone. I sat on the porch in the old wooden rocker, the printed email in my lap. I watched his car pull up, saw him get out with his familiar, easy stride. He still had that half-smile on his face, the mask of our friendship, as he walked up the path. It fell away when he saw my face. "Art? You okay?" "You look," his words died in his throat. "Sit down, Silas." He lowered himself slowly into the other chair, his eyes never leaving mine. The air between us crackled with the static of decades of lies. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just held up the printed email. "I know, Silas. I know everything." The lab confirmed it. "You are the father of William, Thomas, Lily, and Benjamin. All of them. You are their biological father." The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a sepia photograph. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. "Art, that's impossible. It's a mistake," he stammered, the words weak and hollow. "Stop," I said, my voice quiet but razor sharp. "Just stop." How long? How long have you and Clara been carrying on?" He crumpled. The facade of the charming, confident man disintegrated, revealing a terrified, guilty old man beneath. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Since before, he whispered into his palms, "Before the wedding?" A barely perceptible nod. The rage I had been containing erupted, hot and white. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly. "You set me up. You gave me your pregnant girlfriend. You let me marry her. You let me name your children. You watched me kill myself for them. For your family." My voice rose, echoing in the quiet street. "It wasn't like that." He cried, looking up, his face streaked with tears. I loved her. But you had the degree, the career, the future. I was nothing. A salesman. She wanted security. She chose that. But we never stopped, loving each other. He used the word love like a weapon, trying to sanctify the betrayal. "Love?" I spat the word. "You call this love? This deceit? This theft? You stole my life, Silas. You didn't want the responsibility, but you wanted the perks. You got to be the fun uncle, the cool dad, while I worked myself into an early grave paying for it all. You are a parasite." He flinched as if struck. "They loved you, Art. You were their father. You raised them. You just donated the sperm and enjoyed the show I finished for him," my voice dripping with a disgust so profound it sickened me. "Get out. Get off my property. If I see you near my wife or my children again, I will not be responsible for what happens. You are dead to me." He stumbled to his feet, a broken man, He looked at me one more time, a plea in his eyes, but found no mercy there. He turned and shuffled to his car, a defeated ghost. The confrontation with Clara was quieter and somehow worse. She was in the kitchen, mechanically wiping a counter that was already clean. She knew. She had known this day would come for 45 years. "It's over," I said, leaning in the doorway. "I have the proof." I confronted Silas. He confessed. It's been him. From the beginning. All of them. She didn't collapse. She simply went very still, the dishcloth suspended in her hand. Then a single violent tremor ran through her. She turned to look at me, and her eyes held a universe of regret, but no surprise, only the exhaustion of a long vigil ending. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she whispered. "I am so sorry." Sorry? The word felt meaningless, a pebble thrown into the crater of my life. You're sorry for 45 years of lies? For letting me build my entire existence on a fraud? For making me a laughingstock? You and my best friend, you were a team. And I was the mark. She tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a desperate river, fear, youthful confusion, feeling trapped, loving us both in different ways. It was the script of 1,000 daytime dramas, and it meant less than nothing. The facts were the facts. The children were his. My marriage was a sham. My friendship was a weapon used against me. I moved into the guest room that night. The following week I contacted a lawyer, but the hardest duty still lay ahead. Telling my children, the 4 adults who called me Dad. I gathered them at William's house under the guise of a family meeting about Benjamin's treatment. They all arrived, concerned, supportive. I looked at their faces, the faces I had loved since their first breaths, and saw Silas in every line and expression. The truth was now so obvious it was a miracle I'd ever missed it. I had no elegant way to say it. I just began. The tests for Ben's transplant came back. They showed more than just compatibility. I took a deep, shuddering breath. They did genetic testing, and it showed that I am not your biological father. Silence. Utter, profound silence. Thomas blinked. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. William stared, uncomprehending. What does that mean?" Benjamin asked, his voice weak from illness. "It means," I said, forcing the words out, "that biologically I am not related to any of you. All 4 of you have the same biological father, and that man is Silas Morrow." The room exploded. Denial, anger, confusion, tears. That's a lie. Thomas roared, a stupid lab error. Lily wept. Mom would never. William, ever the logical one, just stared at the floor, connecting decades of dots in an instant, his face ash. I showed them the paperwork, the cold, impartial science. I watched as the truth settled onto their shoulders, a crushing, unwanted weight. They had not just learned a secret about their parentage. They had learned that their entire history, their sense of identity, was built on a lie. Their beloved Uncle Silas was their father. Their devoted mother was a lifelong adulteress, and the man they called Dad was a stranger. In the days that followed, the fallout was nuclear. My children confronted Clara. The scenes were brutal, filled with tears and accusations of betrayal that echoed my own. They confronted Silas. William later told me he looked his biological father in the eye and said, "You donated Dina. Arthur Bell is my father. You stay away from us." Helen, Silas's wife, filed for divorce immediately. The quiet woman finally spoke, her voice shaking with decades of pent-up fury and humiliation. She took him for everything. I filed for divorce on the grounds of fraud. The legal process was a cold, clinical dissection of my warmest memories. Clara was left with a small settlement and a desolate apartment. The children, reeling and heartbroken, established a strained, distant relationship with her. The love had been poisoned by the deception. Silas was utterly destroyed. He lost his wife, his home, his best friend, and in the end, his children. William, Thomas, Lily, and Benjamin wanted nothing to do with him. He had 4 biological children in the world who regarded him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was a genetic footnote, not a father. He died in every way that mattered long before his body will. And me? I sold the big empty house that echoed with ghosts. I bought a small, simple condo. I went to therapy. I grieved for the marriage I never had, for the friendship that was a knife in my back, for the innocent trust of my younger self. But a miraculous thing happened in the ashes. My children came back to me. After the initial shock, after their anger at their mother and Silas had burned itself out, they turned to me, not out of obligation, but by choice. One by one, they reached out. William said, "Dad, biology is a recipe. You are the chef who made the meal. You are the one who fed us, taught us, shaped us. That's what matters." Thomas, through his tears, said, "You're my dad. That other guy, he's just a story we now know the beginning of. You're the whole book." Lily wrote me a letter. "You taught me what a good man is. You showed me steady love. That is my inheritance from you, and no test can take it away." And Benjamin, my sick boy, held my hand in his hospital room and whispered, "I only need one father, and he's right here. Biology makes you a parent. Love, sacrifice, and showing up every day, that's what makes you a dad." They chose me. In the face of a truth that could have shattered us, they made a conscious, unwavering choice. They chose the man who raised them. They chose love over blood. It wasn't an instant happy ending. The pain of the betrayal is a scar I will carry forever. Trust is a bridge I may never fully cross again. But the love I share with my children, William, Thomas, Lily, and Benjamin, has been refined in this fire. It is no longer an assumed biological obligation. It is a daily, conscious, chosen commitment. It is stronger now because it has been tested against the worst possible truth and found unbreakable. We have Sunday dinners at my condo now. The kids, their spouses, the grandchildren, the noise and chaos I always craved. We laugh. We talk. We are a family, a real one, built not on the shaky ground of secrets, but on the solid foundation of truth, forgiveness, and choice. Silas lives alone, a bitter and lonely man. Clara lives with the consequences of her choices, a spectral figure at the edges of our lives. And I have my family. So I'll ask you, the person listening to this old man's story, what defines your family? Is it the name on a birth certificate, the shared Dina, or is it the shared history, the sacrifices made, the love that is chosen again and again, even when it's hard? I lost the illusion of the life I thought I had, but in losing it, I found the life that was truly mine. My children gave me that gift. They looked at the ruins and said, "We choose you. We rebuild with you." The lab could prove I wasn't the father, but it could never measure the years of bedtime stories, the saved report cards, the proud tears at graduations, the long nights of worry, the mortgages paid, the advice given, the unconditional love. In all the ways that truly deeply matter, in the ways that echo through generations, I am, and always will be, their father. And in the end, The traitors were left with nothing but their guilt. And I was left with everything that matters. If this story of betrayal, resilience, and the true meaning of family resonated with you, if it touched a place in your heart, do me a kindness. Leave a like on this video. It lets me know I'm not just shouting into the void. And make sure you're subscribed to the Files of Sephora. I share raw, real stories like this every single week. Stories that aren't about fairy tales, but about the messy, painful, and beautiful truth of being human. We're building a community here of people who understand that the most interesting stories are found in the files of real life. And I am genuinely curious. Tell me in the comments below, where are you watching this from right now, and what time is it there? Your city, your country, your moment in the day. It connects us. It reminds me that my story has traveled, and that maybe, in some small way, it's sitting with you in your kitchen, your car, your living room. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. This has been one of the hardest stories I've ever told, and your presence here has made it matter. They didn't choose the blood in their veins. They chose the love in their hearts. And they chose me.